Hey everybody. So we're back. I know it's been a while, but I'm happy to get back so we can finally finish the trio of crazy awesome hypercars with the McLaren P1. And that's today what we're going to geek out about. And there is, like the 918 and the LaFerrari, a lot of stuff to geek out about, as you can imagine with the P1. First off, I have to thank Twitter user Mark Antar. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, because he forwarded me the link to these documents of the presentation that McLaren gave at some point. I never really had an official presentation on the car, so some of this stuff I'm kind of going to stumble through and figure out because, again, I never really had an official presentation. I drove the car back in March. I went to the Geneva Auto Show for the 650S reveal, and then went to England to drive the P1 at Dunsfold Aerodrome, which of course is the race course that Top Gear uses. Oh, I think race course is not the best description of that airport. But anyway, really great time I had with that car. Really interesting experience. And like the LaFerrari and the 918, I wish I had more time with the car. Not because I want to drive it more. I do want to drive it more. But there's so much more to understand in how this car behaves at the limit, because its capabilities are so much higher than any production car on the road. You know, you put these three cars on a racetrack, I would not be surprised if this was the fastest among the three. Its race mode is just so much more advanced and affords the car so much greater capabilities with regard to traction, ride control, body control, aerodynamics, and so on and so on, that on a race course this might be, I wouldn't be surprised if this were the fastest of the three. But anyway, before we talk about more of that, let's get into geeking out about the car. So there's a sort of cutaway, and you can see some of the things already that make this car interesting. Let's back out in concept. P1, like LaFerrari and 918, is a hybrid. Like the 918, it can run around with its engine off and on battery power alone. Unlike the 918, like the LaFerrari, it's rear drive. Unlike both of those cars, it has an open differential, and it does a quarter mile in 9.8 seconds, as I verified, which is pretty amazing. I mean, just think, this is now the fastest production car Motor Trend has ever tested, and I can proudly say that I was the one who got that time out of it. This is the fastest production car in a quarter mile. It has an open differential, and it's a hybrid. What a great time we live in, and how cool is the future going to be when you have production cars doing that. That's insane. But again, we'll talk about that later. So ignore some of this stuff. McLaren's a very cheeky company, as you would hope they would be. And here we get to some of the goals from the outset of the car. Three things interesting setting up the framework for how this car was designed. One, supercar performance is way too high. It's faster than pretty much anything you can do on a public road without getting impounded or by killing yourself. Top speed largely irrelevant in terms of how McLaren sees it, and ultimate supercar doesn't just need to win a drag race. It should do that, but it needs to do a lot more. Also, electric drive is going to be important for the future. So with these four ideas laid out there, that's where we start seeing, that's where the seed is planted for the P1. And this is all McLaren saying this. The light bulb. Haha. So some of the goals: they want the 12C comfort, they want GT race car capabilities on track, they want stunningly beautiful design, I don't know if they hit that, and the last one's really interesting: real EV performance and a 10-second quarter mile acceleration. Imagine going back 10 years and seeing that on a slide for a car. You'd say, no, there's, what? No, you're crazy. But no, they've done it. Some of the comparisons. I love seeing this in here in a McLaren document. That's great. So the team responsible for the P1, I met a few of these guys. They're all the people that I met were all really cool. They're stressing here, of course, years in F1 and years in supercar development. McLaren's been developing supercars for a long time, ever since the F1. They did some for Mercedes, and the 12C was the first car with a McLaren badge on it as a new company a couple years ago, and they are doing some really interesting stuff. The P1's real trick is its race mode. That's the real thing it does. That's the thing it does that makes it different from the rest. With the 918, it's the advanced electric powertrain, that front drive motor. With the LaFerrari, what's so special for that car to me is its absolute linearity and how straightforward that car is. With the P1, it is race mode, and we're going to talk about suspension design and aerodynamic design, how they play into that. So here we go. The P1 is an extension of the McLaren 12C, an extension of the concepts there. There's a lot of similar ideas just pushed to the next level, and the suspension design is part of it. P1, like the 12C, doesn't use any roll bars. It instead has hydraulic lines linking the dampers to one another. Why? Okay, anti-roll bars are great, but they only have one setting. If you have an adjustable anti-roll bar, you have to park, you have to get out, you have to twist it, move it, and all that stuff. And then, even then, you still have a very limited window of settings. When you have the dampers linked together via hydraulic lines, you have a lot more controllability of what the dampers can do and how you can resist roll. There's a very good detailed explanation of this made by Dan Edmonds, who did a suspension walk around of the MP4 12C, back when it was called that, before it was the 12C, and he explains this concept really well, and his suspension walkarounds are worth reading whenever they do them, because he's really good at explaining this stuff. Basically what happens, if you're driving a car into a right-hand corner, right, the load is going to shift to the left. Your left suspension is going to compress, your right suspension is going to unload. So anti-roll is going to counteract that force. Okay, so that's what the hydraulic lines do. You put electronics, computers, accumulators between the hydraulic lines, and then you can control how much roll you get, how much roll you resist. And that's where things get really interesting, because you can make the roll stiffness change mid-corner depending on throttle load, depending on G, depending on wheel speed, depending on whatever parameters you want to put in there. You can change it, you can adjust it. And with as many drive modes as this car has, you can really tailor in how the car behaves in corners depending on whatever variables you want to throw in there. So that's what makes the P1 so interesting. And like when it goes into race mode, its roll stiffness increases by like a factor of 3.5, which is huge. So that's what makes this car really interesting. You can make it roll a specific way on corner entry, and then when you hit the throttle or you have a certain wheel speed, you can change it. And that's, I mean, just think of the calibration and coding work that would have to go into that. That's pretty crazy. Now the green and blue lines are, I think I got a little bit too ahead of myself, are there to resist heave. You don't hear heave a lot on production cars because you really tend to only talk about it when you're working with downforce. Now for the purposes of this car, heave is what happens when you have a ton of downforce and it's pressing the car down. You want to resist that. On the 12C, there was a heave spring, and it kind of looked like the Z-shaped bar that connected the rear end together, and that resisted that downforce. With this car, it's done hydraulically. So again, with the P1, it has a very dramatic range of downforce it can make, as high as like 1,300 pounds, which is just insane. And so you need to be able to tailor that heave resistance accordingly, and that's what this does. And this system allows you to run, softer spring rates, especially compared to the rest of the supercar lineup or performance car lineup. And that means good ride quality. I unfortunately was not able to drive this car on the road, so I can't attest to how good the ride quality was, but I have little reason to doubt it's very good. Back when we tested the 12C in ignition about 3 years ago, we put an accelerometer in the passenger seat and drove it over some bumpy roads at a set speed. Did the same thing with a GTR, did the same thing with a Rolls-Royce, and we're able to see ride quality out of that. And surprise, surprise, the P1 was closer in ride quality to the Rolls-Royce than it was the GTR. This stuff's very effective. And it's really cool if you're driving cars around on a daily basis, which you should be. These cars are awesome and you should be driving them. Aerodynamics, the other crucial role, the other crucial thing. So race mode, again, is going to make incredible downforce. But in road mode, they want it to have less drag than a 12C so it can hit its economy targets. They also have a ton of power. This is 50% more than a 12C. Total power is 904 horse. And so you need to cool that. I mean, think of how much heat that's making. You need to cool that. It's very important. So air management is going to be crucial. So to that end, you have active aerodynamics. You have a wing that stays flush with the bodywork when you're driving it normally. Activate race mode, though, when it goes up to about a foot above the bodywork, 11.8 inches, which is nuts. And it also takes on a pretty dramatic angle of attack to give some downforce. Same thing happens at the front. You also drop ride height quite a bit. I forgot to mention that when we were talking about the suspension design. When you go to race mode, the ride height drops quite a bit. Where's the... I really had to take some notes to ensure that I had all the right information. So your ride height drops 2 inches in race mode, which is pretty dramatic, and you know, not actually street legal. I can't imagine. Looks great when it's parked, awesome on a racetrack, but it's kind of nuts. So back to aerodynamics though. You have these flaps on the front bumper, I guess you'd call it, because this car doesn't really have a bumper. The whole thing is a clamshell. That activate to balance out the airflow. And we'll get into this. We'll get into this a little bit later, into how the air is moving around this bodywork here, because it's a crucial element of the design in terms of how it looks, but also how it works too. Really cool stuff happening there. And here's a CFD representation of airflow around the car. It looks like it's in race mode, given how much the wheels are going into the fenders there. So the e-drive system, like the LaFerrari, this is a very similar battery in concept. So they want to get an EV mode that's reasonable, but they also want to get performance out of it. So they're able to get the benefits of the e-motor, like LaFerrari and like 918 do. So they call their system the Integrated Power Assist System, which is an acronym, is IPASS, which is very cute. I pass you, ha ha ha. So here we have, like the LaFerrari, a couple of graphs describing how electric torque is going to augment engine torque and make the experience great. So in this graph, you have the accelerator pedal here. Now that's showing quarter throttle to half throttle. You know, so imagine you're cruising along and then you add a bit more throttle, and here's your speed relative to that. Here's your engine torque. This is the 3.8 liter V8, very similar to the one that's in the 12C, although all the parts are different. The engine concept's similar, with 2 big turbos on it, and those turbos take a while to make boost. So what you do is you have the electric motor send power as soon as you touch the throttle, and that gives you a surge of acceleration while you wait for the turbos to get on boost. And that's what's happening here, and that's taking about a second at half throttle, which is wild, but you know, half throttle. And then when engine torque meets the electric torque, then you have this really cool acceleration here. And that's what happens with the LaFerrari. So you dip in the throttle. Think of just rolling into the throttle. On a turbo car, you do that and you hear zzz, and then you take off on boost. On this, you still get that sensation. You still hear that sound. But when you roll into the throttle here, you have acceleration. You have really good acceleration. The torque out of this electric motor is 192 pound-feet. So like zero RPM, 200 pound-feet of torque, just rolling on. That feels great at part throttle. And then when you combine that with the event of 2 turbos spooling and like 800 more horsepower coming in, it's quite a thing. So, like I mentioned, the P1 engine is similar to the 12C engine. It makes a lot more power, and here you see how they've shifted the torque over. This is going to look very similar to the differences from the LaFerrari's 6.3 liter V12 to the F12 6.3 liter V12. You shift the power curve to the right because you want to make more power, and because you offset the gap of low RPM torque with battery power. And that's why electric motors are great. Instant throttle response, they allow screaming engines. This thing revs out to like 8,300 RPM or so, and you get all this power at the top at the cost of all this power down low. And then here's how the boost fills in that gap. Auto boost, I believe that's going to be the, I don't know if that's combined, I don't know if that's electric torque. It must be electric torque down here and then combined up here. Again, I wish I had a actual presentation from McLaren people so I could ask some questions. And then you have the iPass button, which we'll talk about a little bit later. That's like a manual electric mode that acts like a nitrous shot. Really interesting setting. So here's KERS from last year's Formula 1 cars. You have accelerator pedal here at the bottom. That's going, I think that's going to 100% throttle. Car speed, engine speed, these guys would be gear changes right here. And then you have this black line's battery charge level. Engine torque is the burgundy brownish line, and then combined torque is the red line. And as you can see, they're really aggressive on battery usage here. Really aggressive on that. And really aggressive on regen from braking. Look how much battery they're able to regen through downshifts and braking here. Pretty cool, excuse me. On a straight. Now, iPass is slightly different. Similar throttle load. Here I hear to 100%. Partial throttle. Engine speed with a couple gear changes. Car speed. Now look at engine torque, burgundy, and combined torque, which is red, and battery charge level. You'll note that engine torque actually exceeds combined torque, and I may be wrong, but what McLaren says they're doing is when you're at like partial throttle load, 50% throttle, let's say, the engine will produce more torque than necessary, and the extra torque, the additional torque, goes to charge the battery, because you don't, why not charge the battery, keep it at full, just in case you need to do, I don't know, a 10-second quarter mile like that. And then once the throttle level, the throttle request becomes 100%, that's when combined torque jumps above that. And you can see here is the best example of it, how the combined torque is less than the engine torque, but look how much the battery rate, look how much the battery charges. Now, why is that impressive? Well, because the P1 doesn't do any regen under braking. So it has to rely on creating additional torque through the engine in order to charge the batteries. That's the only way it can generate battery power. Why did McLaren do that? McLaren says that regen brake systems screw up brake feel, and they're completely accurate in that assessment. The 918, the car that we had was a development car, and the braking feel was great most of the time, then occasionally it would just feel off, and that would make you feel kind of nervous, especially when you're bombing into corners at the speeds that car's capable of. The LaFerrari was better at speed, but at slow speed driving, the feel never had the consistency I was looking for. So the P1, definitely in terms of brake feel, is the best of the bunch, but the downside is it can't regen battery power as aggressively as the LaFerrari or the 918 can. And, if you have a track with some long straights, you're probably going to run into some battery depletion issues like we did with the 918. Of course, this car relies a lot less on its battery than the 918 does, but I think it still might be an issue. Again, we haven't driven this car on a track long enough to test that, but that'd be great too, because this car would be a lot of fun to drive. Now here's a couple laps of a track. So, these speeds are consistent here. So you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, maybe 10 laps of a track here, just based on the Vmax of each lap. And the charge level that happens each lap, and the motor and battery temperature. Temperature is going to be really important because when you have 1,000 horsepower, you're making a ton of heat. And so what they're demonstrating here is that the battery temp and motor temp can remain consistent even under limit acceleration. With 240 km/h top speed at the track, that's going to be like 140 miles an hour, I think, which compared to, I mean, like considering how fast this car isn't that fast. At streets, the 918 was doing, not at streets, I'm sorry, at Big Willow, the Porsche 918 was doing 165 miles an hour, 166 maybe, I think. That's what these cars are capable of doing. The front straight of Laguna Seca, these cars are going to be doing 160, 170. Like, that's a lot of speed. And I'd be really curious on a long track with long straights, your Road Americas, for example, your VIRs, how that battery is going to be able to maintain that torque. Not torque, I'm sorry, charge. Because if you're only regenning power at part throttle, your part throttle situations aren't very big on some of these racetracks. They're big when you're driving around, but think about it, most of the time you're gradually getting on power within 100% and then hard on the brakes. So I'd be really curious to see state of charge on a longer track with some real straights on it. And then the efficiency of the hybrid system. Efficiency on this, it works. It's a zero emissions hybrid partial, or, you can drive around with the engine off. Your range is about 6 miles or so, which isn't much. And when I asked Ferrari what their range would be if had they done an E mode, they said it would have been around 6 miles too, and to Ferrari that was not worth it. To McLaren, they figure why not? We'll give it to you, and you can use it if you want. What's really cool is, as I've talked to a couple people who have been to car shows with this car, it's really cool to have this car drive up, engine off, and then just cruise into the space silently. Really, really cool stuff. It says energy recovery during braking. That might be during engine braking, not brake braking, because this car definitely does not have a brake regen in it. They're very, very certain about that. And then here are your powertrain modes. There are quite a few: race, track, sport, normal, E mode. And the different philosophies and what happens here. The really interesting thing in this car is the difference in philosophy between McLaren and Porsche. When the 918, when you're driving around in E mode and you're starting to run out of battery power, the engine will kick on to charge it, maintain the state of charge. But McLaren alerts you. There's a countdown. There's an audible alert, there's a visual alert on the gauge. They really want you to know when the battery's about to be depleted and that the engine's going to come on. They say, hey, by the way, guy, we're going to turn this bad boy on. Are you ready? Are you sure? Are you sure? Porsche doesn't do that. Porsche just kicks the engine on and all hell breaks loose behind you. And it's really interesting how McLaren wants to warn its drivers that, hey, the engine's going to come on. And Porsche's just like, the engine's on. Whatever. Just interesting change in mindset there. So the total drivetrain and the goals. They wanted 647 brake horsepower, which is metric horsepower per ton, 217 mile an hour electronically limited top speed, 60 accelerate 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, and so on and so on and so on. And so these are all the targets, and they hit them, which was pretty crazy because they're really aggressive and really cool targets. So in induction and exhaust, the exhaust in this sounds wild. It's a V8, but it's not your typical grunty V8. It's a high revving, really interesting sound. And then the induction is all happening through the roof snorkel, and it sounds really cool when you roll on the throttle because the turbos, like, there's no hiding that sound. And they are like any tuner loud, crazy turbo system where you hear this, as you accelerate, and it makes for quite an event. Accelerations in this car, you know when it's happening. There's nothing subtle about that, and that's as it should be with a car this powerful. Interesting here that they say they considered V10 and V12 engines and went with the V8 instead. You know, they say that they couldn't hit the packaging or the weight targets, and that's interesting in contrast with LaFerrari saying they looked at smaller engines to make the car smaller itself, but ended up going with the V12. McLaren looked at a V12 and ended up going with the V8. Really interesting, and I can't imagine they would seriously have gone with a V10 or V12 because they would have had to create an entirely new engine, and why do that when you already have this really effective V8 ready for the modification and ready for use? So interesting that they say here that they were looking at that. As I mentioned, the engine itself is evolution of the 3.8 liter V8 in the 12C, and all the parts are new. Essentially, it's not the same engine, but it's similar in concept. What I think they don't mention in here is how they control the differential. They don't really advertise the fact that this car doesn't have a locking differential. It's an open diff, and they manage it all through the stability control system. All the traction control, stability control systems, and the brakes manage that torque, and it works really well. I mean, the whole system is invisible, essentially, until you turn it off. I spent a good portion of my time with it on in race mode, thinking, man, this car is crazy controllable, it's really putting down the power well, and then turned it off for a couple of the drift shots, stepped on the throttle, and just left plumes of white smoke behind me. It's crazy. Like the 12C, stability control, is it traction? I think traction control is not completely defeatable. You can basically get rid of most of it, but there's always going to be a little bit there. The battery power, and here's where we get to the energy storage in the system. They're claiming here that it's the highest power density battery pack in a road going car, and there is some interesting stuff here. It's not a big battery, but it does have a lot of power, or the motor itself is able to generate a lot of power. The total horsepower of the motor, the electric motor, is 177 horsepower. 177 horsepower, 192 pound-feet of torque. When you're in E mode, you know, that's essentially the power to weight of a Civic Si, which is fine. I mean, considering that you're not using any gas whatsoever. I mean, that's pretty cool. 324 cells in the pack. And here's how they're arranged. And here we're getting into how you manage the cooling of all these cells. They're liquid cooled, and managing cooling of all these cells and the weight is crucial, and that's what this is going into here. One of the interesting things they do as well is move the charge through the battery pack to help extend the life of the battery pack. It's all done by Ricardo Battery Management. I imagine that's the same Ricardo that does transmissions or engine management. I imagine. Cell balancing, that's what I was talking about earlier. Moves the charge around the battery pack to make sure that all the batteries receive similar loads, essentially. And the integrated power assist, and these are, I don't know if these were the outline goals. So the thing is, I don't know how old this PDF is, because some of the figures have changed. They're claiming, actually it must just be metric to imperial horsepower. 180 bhp must be 177 horsepower or so, and the weight of the system itself. They must have been talking about Formula E, how it compares to here, and then the addition of turbos in V6s and F1 in 2014. And that's the end of the functional stuff underneath the car. And we'll get into how it looks, the design of the P1, and why it looks the way it does, which is primarily because of aerodynamics. So you want the air to go around the car as cleanly as possible, but you also have some dramatic cooling needs that you need to, you know, fill. You have radiators you want to hit, but you also don't want to create all this nasty turbulent air unless it's filling some specific goal. So that's why the fender and door and front look the way they do, because they want to manage airflow around the wheel, cool the brakes, and then feed the radiator. You want to cool the brakes, you want to cool the engine, you want to cool the electric motor, you also want to feed air cleanly into it. And that's why the side looks the way it does. And that's why there's that interesting slit in the fender right about where that mouse is, and that's all to manage that airflow. Here are the cooling targets. Speaking of, I don't know what LTR is, but this is saying how they hit those targets, how close they got to those targets and with that airflow. Some pictures of the car in the wind tunnel. It looks good with the camo on it. Organic forms are efficient. So the thing about evolution is it really, you know, it favors animals that can reproduce, and the more you survive, the more you can reproduce, and how efficient you are at getting through things has direct correlation to how much you can reproduce and how long you can survive. So things that tend to function well and reproduce a lot tend to exist in great numbers, and so if there's a good shape that tends to be very good and making you safe and so you can reproduce, then it tends to exist. So this is drawing comparisons to organic shapes and how their function is tied into the car itself. Some of this you're just like, yeah, really? I don't know. And then coming down to the final design. So I don't really like the way the P1 looks. It photographs really well. In person, the proportions are weird. It is a very aggressive looking car. It is a very dynamic looking car. It's a very eye-catching car. And when you're talking about design, you really need to be careful about how you're defining your terms. To me, the car just isn't pretty. It's not beautiful. And to me, I am attracted to things that are beautiful, to have a really good aesthetic value. And this is more overt, in-your-face aggression. Like a GTR is aggressive. It's not beautiful, it's aggressive. Like a 250 GTO is beautiful. And so that's why I don't really feel the styling of this car and the design of this car. I get it. I get why it works. I also think some of the details too, like the constant repetition of McLaren logos, is a little overwrought. There's no denying the appeal of it though, because it looks like it fell out of an alien spaceship, and you know, humans just happen to be able to interface with it really nicely. So going over some radiator themes here, how they manage airflow into the sides there, and then how they manage airflow through the roof and out of the exhaust. Yeah, these renders and stuff are great. I just love the fact that they actually did a render of a car power sliding onto a straight. That's really cool. That's great. And we're getting into glass here and how all this stuff is laid out. The hard points of the glass meeting the pillars, meeting the roof. And what's really interesting is because the tub, the carbon fiber tub, is the only thing there is. You know, there are 5 pieces of bodywork on this car. There's 2 doors, the front and rear clamshells, and the hood for your cargo. That's it. Everything else is all carbon fiber structure. In fact, who was it that was explaining to me? One of the McLaren guys was explaining that to me, and he says, and it weighs 2/10 of fuck all when talking about why they did it. The fewer parts you have, the less things weigh, right? So if you have bumpers, hoods, fenders, quarter panels, doors, all the attachment points add up and end up weighing a lot. The more parts you can build into a single piece, the more functions a single piece can do, it's going to be really complex to design that piece, but it's going to pay dividends with regard to weight. And so that's why the P1 is the way it is in terms of body design. Really cool this is you could conceivably take off all the bodywork and drive it without any of it. That'd be pretty cool to see. There's the car in clay. And you kind of wonder, like, this is when you really start seeing how weird the proportions look. The way that slopes down just doesn't quite really work for me. But I'm not saying it's ugly. If you like it, hey, great. It's kind of funny that they put one of the 2007, is it 6 or 7, the McLaren F1 cars, because that was not a great year for Formula 1 car design in terms of beauty. The details, the aerodynamic details on these cars were wild. That's when they were really let go with aerodynamics. One of the interesting things is when we were at the factory, we got to see the McLaren factory. And when you buy a P1, you can choose any color you want. If there's a certain, like if there's your favorite shoes and there's a color on your shoes that you like, they will paint it that color. Not only will they paint it that color, they will give you every single possible variation of that color. And when we walked into the body shop of the P1, there were these little P1s about that big. I don't know if they're plastic or carbon fiber, probably plastic. And I want to say there was like 25 to 50 of them, all arranged in a gradient on one possible color. So if you like say orange, right? Well, what hue, what shade of orange? So when you specify your color to McLaren, they produce this gradient off that color, and you get to choose which one you like. And what they were doing for customers is they would mix the paint, spray this little model, and mail it to you. And you would look at that and say, oh yeah, that's a cool color, I'll take it in that color. And you would let them know, or say, oh no, I want it to be slightly different. They would do that. Really interesting. I'm happy they're not all Ferrari red. It's really cool seeing the wilder colors on this car, because the looks of this car really change depending on color. When I was at the factory, Jay Leno's car was just getting finished. He, of course, got it in bright yellow, and it looks very different in bright yellow than it does in black. Not just for color, but the color affects the shape of the car. And it's really cool that the color options are so varied, and that you don't have to just get it in one color. I really like that. The P1's interior is... Well, let's back up. Let's start from the design concept. And you can see some of the alien influences they were looking at when they were sketching it out. Interesting that they talked about having a head-up display, because after a few drinks, a couple of the McLaren folk admitted that they don't like head-up displays, which is interesting because I love heads-up displays, so long as they're done right. So long as you are really selective on the color, the data that's shown, and doesn't get too over-designed, so long as it's simple. Like, I just like seeing speed on the windshield. But they don't. So it's really interesting that they said here that they admire, or that they were looking at it. But look how, futuristic this design is. They're really looking toward the future for the layout here. And it gets really spacey. They threw it all away. And then started fresh. Imagine sitting in the tub of the P1, being tasked with designing its interior. Sitting there. That's a lot of responsibility on your shoulders. So they're saying here that they took inspiration from the cooling unit put on F1 cars when the driver's in the pits. That seems effective, right? It works in Formula 1. So let's channel the AC ducting around the front. This is showing some of the problems with some of the futuristic design and how they made it work. So there's your AC ducts, or your air vents, right around the steering wheel. Some more layout stuff. It's interesting how they talked about doing a shift light at one point, because that never made it to production. I'm sure you could contact McLaren Special Operations and they'd make one for you, but they didn't do that. They also, I don't know if this digital readout made it to the production car either, but this stack in the center certainly did. That's very similar to the 12C. This may all be 12C stuff. Again, I don't know, because I wasn't there for this presentation. And then the steering wheel and the seat itself looks like P1. Doing it all in clay to see it in person. I like seeing these Recaro seats. They kind of look like the pole positions we have in the 240SX, which is pretty cool. And this also makes you think, hey, what if they did a convertible roadster? That'd be interesting. But anyway, seeing it all to come together. As the interesting thing pointed out here is that the armrest is part of the tub. It's not additional door structure. It's all in the tub. And then the final. So, if you don't like carbon fiber, the interior of the P1 is not for you, because it is everywhere. It's all unmarked. I mean, this is just, hey, you better like carbon fiber looking at this car. If you don't, I'm sure McLaren Special Operations would do anything you want to cover it up. But, man, I'm personally a little tired of carbon fiber as a design motif, but they went at it full bore in this car. Really, because it stresses the fact that this car relies on carbon fiber to be what it is. Some of the other materials, like gold and titanium, carbon fiber. Now, getting into carbon fiber, the tub, the monocell, is from, I think the windshield down is the exact same as the McLaren 12Cs. They've modified the roof, I think most likely to incorporate the snorkel on the roof, but it's the same process. As I mentioned in the 918 video, they get these tubs from the same place that Porsche gets their 918 tubs, and they use a combination of carbon fiber materials that are all done through, I believe it's a combination of injection molding and hand-laid pre-preg carbon fiber. The primarily RTM injection molding, though, seems to work well. And it's interesting because Ferrari made such a stink about how injection molding is not great for weight savings, and McLaren's pretty, you know, they know their stuff. I mean, they're calling themselves carbon fiber pioneers, and they went with RTM. So there must be some advantage there that they're not talking about, but it certainly shows. I mean, they're claiming a weight for this car like in 3,300 pounds or something like that, so it's super light. Let's look at the tub really quick. These are your crash structures. There's going to be aluminum that comes out here, and that basically just serves as crumple zone for if the car ever, you know, goes headfirst into a tree or something, or to a cement, I don't know, giant block or something. Hope they don't, right? Excuse me. And this gets back into what I was talking about, how the more components you have, the more things weigh. And this is saying if you incorporate the side pods, the snorkel, the airbox, the battery box, the wiper mountings, everything, if you incorporate all that stuff into the cell itself, you save weight. And that's why the roof is different than the 12C. So they're saying they had over 200 components at the very beginning, and if you could reduce that to 3 carbon fiber molds, you save a ton of weight. To how it feels to drive, and man, that's why I wish we had more time with this car, because it is like nothing else I've ever driven. American press didn't get that much time with the car, to be honest. It seemed like the British press got quite a bit of seat time with the P1, but you know, British car maker, British press, American journalists get a ton of time with American cars, German journalists get a ton of time with German cars. That's just how the world works. But 4 laps in this, which is pretty much what I got to do, was not enough time to come to grips with the capabilities of this car. Yeah, we were able to do some additional, you know, cornering shots and power sliding shots, but there's a level of performance here that you just don't get in production cars. And so learning, I would have liked to spend a lot more time in it to learn how the suspension system behaves, how the aerodynamics behave. When you have the level of customization in the suspension system and in the aerodynamics, the trick is to make all those adjustments feel linear, and so you don't feel like when you're driving it, the car is just sort of operating in weird ways around you. You want all those systems to work invisibly, and feel good doing so. And to be honest, in the laps that I had, the car is so stunningly fast and its limits are so high, I simply wasn't able to suss out those differences. You're working with a level of performance here, again, like nothing else. And, you know, I'm not the greatest driver in the world. I'm okay. Unless you're a professional racing car driver, like, this car is going to be... And that's not to say the car's scary. That's a really interesting thing, is this car's really easy to drive. Like, I'm not saying that I felt like I couldn't handle it. I was just at my own limits, set by my own personal expectations of what a car can do, of how great performance can be. And every time I would approach a corner, I was like, man, I left a lot of braking on the table. Going through a corner, man, I left a lot of speed on the table. And when you have a car with such high limits, you know, that costs $1.3 million a piece, that they're all sold out of, you want to drive them carefully, but you don't want to just bomb into a corner as fast as you can, because you don't want to be the guy who wrecks one. But learning them takes time. Learning them takes a lot of time. I saw the learning curve. I could see it, and it wasn't out of reach. It was just something that would take a long time to get familiar with. And that's just because the limits are so much higher than everything else. It's incredible. So the center gauge, the gauge cluster, the full center screen is an LCD, and it changes depending on the mode that you're in. So when you have, when the car's off, but when the key's in, here's your standby screen. When you're in E mode, there's your speed. When there's your drive mode, there's your tack, and when you're in race mode, here's your full balls out gauge. I was kind of bummed that there wasn't like an indicated red line. Basically, you just get a shift light. All the lights start flashing at you like crazy. But it is cool to see the energy recovery system, the drag reduction system, graphs and stuff change depending on what you're doing. Like if you're just going full out, if you look at the video where we're doing the acceleration run, you see the DRS start to change as speeds increases, because the car needs to bleed off drag because it knows it's doing an acceleration run. It's pretty cool. Carbon fiber, carbon fiber, carbon fiber. When you go into race mode, you have to put the parking brake on, you hit race mode, and then you get this graphical display of the car changing. And the car actually moves. It shows the car lowering 2 inches. It shows the wing going up. It shows the angle of attack changing. It highlights all the things that are changing. And this is also highlighting some of the other things, like the rev counter and so on. I really wish they would have done, I mentioned this probably already, I really wish they would have done a shift light on the steering wheel itself. What happens is the wheel telescopes. No, it doesn't telescope. It goes up and down. I forget the term. But if I had the wheel in a place where I could see the speedo, I couldn't see the tack. If I had it in a place where I could see the tack, I couldn't see the speedo. So I ended up choosing seeing the tack, but then I had no idea what my speed was, and that's why heads-up displays are cool. But anyway, minor inconvenience. I like having a steering wheel that's real low, but that's just my personal preference. Jumping to brakes. So P1 uses carbon ceramic rotors like all crazy high-performance cars do, but these rotors were supplied by Accabono, who is McLaren's Formula One brake partner. I think they're like the only non-Brembo brake partner in Formula One. Really interesting, and they're a Japanese company too. So these carbon ceramics were really, really, really fascinating for a couple of reasons. One, the performance of them, of course. The durability, the F1 link, all this stuff. This is going through all the calipers, it looks like, Accabono supplied to McLaren for Formula One. But also the material. So the rotor itself uses this material that was used on the Ariane rocket program, which is a British space program, and it has a really interesting effect. And that is when the brakes are brand new, they're dull. They don't look like your typical carbon ceramics. They have a really dull shape to them. But the harder you use them, the more they gain this mirror finish. So it's kind of like a telltale sign on a motorcycle rear tire. So if you see a guy who's riding a motorcycle, a superbike, and you look at it and there's that skunk stripe, you know he doesn't do a lot of hard cornering. Similarly, if you're at a car show and you look at P1 brakes and they're dull, that person does not do a lot of hard driving. So if you see that, you should encourage them to drive their car more and harder because this is a car that deserves to be driven. Weight reduction of the caliper itself, the cooling capacity for or how they channel air around the wheels to cool the brakes. You know, they call these things at some point virtually indestructible, which I believe. I mean, these rotors looked just absolutely massive. Interestingly, they are slightly smaller than the 12Cs because once you hit a certain brake efficiency target, you don't need any more rotors, so why go for it? And the rears are a little bit smaller too. 800 degrees Celsius, that's I think 1400 degrees Fahrenheit, or 1300 degrees Fahrenheit. That's really, really, really hot. So they tested the hell out of these rotors. And now we're not finishing up with, but we're getting into tires. So Pirelli designed a special P0 Corsa for the P1, and that's the standard tire. I love the labels here. You have massive downforce, good on the road, awesome lap time, and very high speed. That's great. The optional tire is the Pirelli Super Trofeo R, which is the standard tire on the Camaro Z28. That's right. The standard tire on the Camaro Z28 is the optional tire for the P1, and I wish I had a camera so I could show you the look on the McLaren engineers' faces when I told them that there's a Camaro in the US that's using their optional tires. They were astonished. They didn't believe me. They were like, "What do you mean?" That's why the Z28 is so crazy awesome. These courses, I mean, I'm sure they're fine. I mean, this gets back to testing. The only testing I was able to do is really that one acceleration run, and you really need time to be able to see the performance capabilities of these cars. Yeah, here's your virtually indestructible disc. I love that. Maybe these things, when the apocalypse happens, it'll be cockroaches and Akabona rotors that that survive. So part of the development process for the P1 involved 200 back-to-back launch control runs. And as somebody who does vehicle testing on a weekly basis, I just feel sorry for the guy who had to do that. You know, you do 10 to 20 launch control runs in a row, you'll get bored. I don't care what the car is, you'll get bored or you'll get sick. And you can do that with a McLaren, you can do that with a Porsche. Not a lot of cars permit that kind of back-to-back abuse. 200 back-to-back launch control runs is insane. That is just freaking nuts. But that's what they wanted this car to do. And it did it. And that is absolutely crazy. I bet you could get this wrap through McLaren Special Operations. That may be the way to get the P1 is with the camouflage wrap on it instead of the bright colors, because it looks real mean in that black and white design. That's real cool. McLaren, the McLaren factory is 40 minutes from Dunsfold. So whenever Top Gear does set the P1 lap time around that track, I would not be surprised if it was the fastest, because McLaren does development at Dunsfold. And so the more time you have to develop at a track, the faster you're going to be at it. That's just how it works. So that's the feels of the car. Now I also have here some pictures, as I always tend to. So here's these are just from the PDF. There's the induction and exhaust system. That's the full kit and caboodle there. how everything works with one another. The battery and the motor, battery alone, the battery, the motor, and where it sits. It sits in between. The powered point is between the engine and the transmission, like the 918. Where the LaFerrari, it's, excuse me, man, the LaFerrari, it's on the back of the transaxle here. The engine itself, the engine, transmission, car, ghost. I like these cutaways. And here's a really good system showing the hydraulic accumulators and all that between the suspension. The accumulators are these guys right here. There's gonna be, there they are on the front there. And man, it's a really cool system. I just wish I had more time to test this, because it's just such a fascinating design. I mean, this is the stuff that, you know, is not in Formula 1 because it was banned, and it's not in rally racing because it was banned, because it's so damn effective. And so when you know that, when you say like, hey, this is banned technology, you really wish you had more time in it. There's the engine itself. It's you pop the rear, you look in the back of the P1, like the 12C, you don't see the engine at all. It's so low in the car for center of gravity that it's invisible. And then when I was talking about the 5 body pieces, this is the entire rear end of the P1. I mean, this is all one piece, and I can imagine how difficult it is to make this stuff. But man, is that cool. And there's the dash, and then here's a cutaway of the powertrain. And I think that's that. And I also got, as I always do, some photos on my iPhone. So here's the dash in person. The car that I drove was a prototype. It was validation prototype 5 of 5, and it had 10,000 miles on it, so 16 and a half kilometers. And it didn't feel exceptionally rough or anything. It was kind of surprising at how nice that car drove. Here's that center stack, and yeah, I don't know if these graphics were production, but they don't look, frankly, that great. Kind of low res. But I took this picture because the HVAC, little figure in the HVAC, he's wearing a helmet, which is a cool touch. And there's a car hard parked at Dunsfold in race mode. That right there is VP 5 of 5. That's an American spec car too. Man, does it look? It certainly looks imposing. Okay, so this is normally red, the McLaren logo. The reason why I took this picture is because I was talking to the head of McLaren Special Operations and one of the development guys, and I look at that and I say, hey, is that real carbon fiber? And they looked at each other and went, shit, no, that's not real carbon fiber. So it's pretty funny, as much carbon fiber as they use on this car, the optional McLaren logo that's carbon fiber is not actual carbon fiber. I suspect after asking them this question, taking this photo, and publishing this online with the story, going forward, all these badges will be carbon fiber. So that's my only real expose of the P1. And then here it is looking badass next to a big plane. And gratuitous drifting shot. So the interesting thing about the way this car drives, even with stability control on, is they built a little bit of oversteer into the stability control system. They allow you, even when everything's on, to step the tail out a little bit because it makes you feel good. But they certainly take control back when things get a little hairy. And you could tell that because the LED, the brake lights, would actually flicker when stability control is intervening. So when you look at videos of this car power sliding, you can tell if whoever's driving is relying on stability control, because you can see their taillights flickering. I'll say this, the P1 was easier to drift than the 918. Stability control off, even. It was very controllable, really easy to drive, despite having an open differential, and with that brake control system setting torque, diverting torque to each rear tire. And then here's the acceleration of the P1. I think we might be, no, we were the exclusive. I think other people have been able to do acceleration runs on the P1 after we did ours. I'm just particularly proud of this because I brought our small V box to Dunsfold. It's about the size of a radar detector. And when we were finishing up the shoot, I just took the car to the end of the runway, threw the V-box in, set up the antenna, and then hit the launch control button and did a acceleration run. The car was full of fuel at that point, I want to say. I think they had just gone to fuel it up. And literally, the run that we got, a 9.8 at like 148 miles an hour, was the first run. Now, that's impressive for the speed, but it's also impressive because cars that run sub 10-second quarter miles need a lot of babying, or they tend to, at least. Compared to, so the red line here is the P1, the blue is the AMS Alpha 12, and the green's the Aventador. So, just look at the gap between the Aventador and the other two cars. That's all horsepower. That is just simply horsepower and weight. The reason why I put the AMS Alpha 12 is because its time is similar. But also, when I was driving the P1, the first time I went out and I came back, and I forget who I was talking to, but I said, the acceleration of that car reminds me of the 1200 horsepower GTR I tested a while ago. And I mentioned that car did a 9.9 on drag radials. And the person I was talking to said, oh yeah, that was our internal goal. We wanted to do it under 10. And I said, really? And so that's why I really wanted to do an acceleration run in the P1. As soon as I heard that, I was like, okay, we have to validate this. The AMS Alpha 12 is an awesome car. After every acceleration run, we plugged a laptop into it, or AMS plugged a laptop into it to make sure the launch point was right, to make sure boost was right, to make sure everything was right. It needed a little bit of refresh after every single run, which makes the P1's launch control 9.8 second quarter on street tires much more impressive because it was on street tires and I literally just hit the button and went. I actually didn't realize it had done a sub 10-second quarter mile. If you look at the video, you can see my reflection in my hands. I actually take my hand off the steering wheel and scratch my head as the car's doing 160. Like, it was that easy. It is absolutely crazy how much performance has changed. Let's see if there's anything. Let's put this up. Let's see if there's anything that I missed. It goes through fuel at an astounding rate. When you're on the throttle, man, you will go through fuel very quickly. Oh, back to that graph. At 100 miles an hour, P1's red. We tested a Veyron back in 2008. That's the only time we've ever been able to do an accel run on a Veyron. And at 100 miles an hour, the P1 is a second faster than the Veyron. A second faster. Back, the Veyron used to be like, oh my god, cars will never be this fast. And here we are, 2014, and the P1's hit 100 a second faster than the Veyron has. It's just absolutely incredible. Oh, I didn't touch on the iPass system. So iPass, let's go back to the steering wheel. Do I have a picture of the steering wheel? There must be one in this directory here. How is that? How do I not have a picture of the steering wheel? So iPass is a manually controllable boost setting. So you say, where's that button on the dash? So there's a button on the center stack that you hit to activate boost mode. And then there's two buttons on the steering wheel. There's one for DRS and there's one for iPass. Without boost mode, DRS happens automatically, and when you're not in boost mode, your electric assist happens automatically. But should you want to control them manually, you can. And after a few beers, the McLaren engineering team admitted this is just to impress your friends. So you hit boost mode, and then when you're driving straight, say you go 100% throttle, and then you hit iPass, then it spikes torque from the electric motor and gives you, a 200 horsepower shot. And that feels cool. It feels like hitting nitrous. DRS works the same way. You hit that button to reduce drag, and I'm assuming had I held that DRS button through the entire quarter-mile run, the car would be even faster. The problem is, after I finished that quarter-mile run, the car literally got a flat tire. I turned around, I was ready to stage it for another acceleration run, and then I got the low tire pressure light, and I was like, oh crap, that was it. God, I hope that time was good. So I wasn't able to try it. Still though, DRS happens automatically, boost mode happens automatically, but if you want to impress your friends, you can activate it just to show off, which is pretty funny. And, you know, McLaren's, they're a very light-hearted company for how fast the cars are. And I think that's going to do it. Happy to wrap up the trio of amazing, spectacular hypercars. If you have any questions on these cars, hit me up on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr. I think that's it. I can't think of another social media outlet I haven't appeared on. I'm happy to answer your questions. I'm happy to do more of these videos, and thanks for watching.